Hello everybody, this is Terensu again, and here we are with our Let's Play of the original Tekken on PlayStation 1. So what you're seeing now is the console exclusive cutscene, introductory cutscene that they created for this port. Those of you who are not fans of the Tekken series may not know this, but the Tekken series always premieres first in the arcade and then is ported to either PlayStation or PlayStation 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever the current generation is. Now they've started bringing them to Xboxes as well, although there's a rumor that Tekken 7 is not coming to Xbox One. It will be interesting to see whether it does or not. But anyway, you don't get that cutscene in the arcade because the arcade version, they generally skimp on the story to get it out there as soon as possible and then move over to the console version for the story. Now, a lot of people just play Tekken for the fighting, and some people like the story. I like both. I really like to play the game, but I also think it's fun to know who these characters are and why they're fighting each other. The Tekken story, as far as fighting game stories go, it's not really that good, but it's not as bad as some of them I've heard either. If you want to see some really bad fighting game stories, look at some obscure fighting games from the 90s, back during the fighting game craze. Some of those games just had any old excuse that they could come up with to make people kill each other. But anyway, this is the PSX port of Tekken. We'll get started. And as I stated, we're going to play as Chaolan, because here's to hoping that he's in Tekken 7. Now, I actually started a new file. I have not broke out the PlayStation 1 Tekken in a while, so I started a new file. Of course, to unlock all the sub-boss characters, which Lee is a sub-boss, you have to beat the game with their rival. And Kazuya is Lee's rival, so I went ahead and beat the game with him before we started. So in Tekken 1, the sub-boss characters, Lee in particular, is pretty limited as far as what they can do. If you use cheats to hack the sub-bosses in the arcade version, they're very, very limited. They're almost straight copies of the characters that they emulate. Lee is a copy of Law for the most part in the early Tekken games, with, of course, some variation. And I'm not doing very well at all. I've lost the very first round because I'm too busy talking. And it's been a very long time since I played Tekken 1. We're going to see if we can't turn it around. Jack is actually probably one of the worst characters in the game, just because he's so big and slow and awkward. Tekken 1 and 2 and 3 and Tag Tournament had awesome music. And one tradition that they always did, which they probably won't bring back because it would be too much trouble, but in the old Tekken games, you had an arcade soundtrack and an arrange soundtrack. And so what that means is the arcade version had a soundtrack, of course, and then when they released it on PlayStation, they would remix every song in the game and put them in there, and you could actually choose whether you wanted the original or the remade soundtrack. I believe we're playing with the remade soundtrack. It's a little bit better in Tekken 1. I'm actually glad I got Nina early on. She can be a bit of a pain if you had to fight her later. You also notice that in Tekken 1, they didn't put a whole lot of effort into the sub-boss characters. Lee actually has Kazuya's voice, which is ridiculous. It wasn't until Tekken 2 onward that Lee got his own voice. I'm doing terrible once again. And part of this is because Lee is, like I said, he's very limited in Tekken 1. He doesn't have a whole lot of moves. None that the CPU won't just mercilessly avoid and counter, that is, anyway. CPU in the older Tekkens is not nearly as friendly as it is in Tekken Tag Tournament 2, 3, and Tag in those games. So I have to be a little cheap to get by here, but that's okay. Lee does have his signature laugh, which is funny because I want to know if that's the same guy that did Kazuya's voice that did that laugh, or if they just recorded that completely separate. It is interesting to note that Lee has had the laser edge kick since Tekken 1, which is that down 4-4-4-4 combo I'm doing there. This one. He actually does not have that in the arcade version. The CPU will never use that move because it doesn't have it. And if you hack the game to control those characters, you can't use it either because it doesn't exist. I get the feeling that most of the movesets for sub-bosses in the PlayStation port came from the Tekken 2 movesets for these characters. Because like I said, I'm pretty sure Tekken 2 was in the arcades while this port was coming out. In general, Tekken 1 is just, and 2 are just completely different movement-wise from newer Tekkens. No one really has a sidestep until 2 when Kazuya gets one. Also, there's no neutral guard in Tekken 1, so if you stand still, you can get punched. So it's like some other 3D fighters at the time with that. Also, there's not really any way to counter guard. Counter throws. When someone throws you, you have to pretty much just throw at the same time they do or move out of the way. If you throw at the same time, they'll just cancel each other out, or you'll both fall down in some cases. The CPU tends to just move out of the way or duck. Tekken 1 on PlayStation has very unforgiving AI as far as reading your inputs. They also do silly things like attempt the Frankensteiner over and over. I can't imagine how terrifying it must be to fight in the King of Iron Fist tournament, and like the background of where you're fighting just constantly goes in and out of the horizon as you move. Also, Tekken 1 has moon jumping for some reason. No, get down. But I mean, what other game can let you punch a guy in a tiger mask in the back of the face? I mean, you just can't compete with that. He got me on that one. Get out of here, King. One thing I did like about Tekken 1 is that they put the stage location down there in the bottom corner. The newer Tekkens kind of took place at, less realistic locations. Some of them are real, but there was a lot of fake ones. The Tekken 1 plot kind of has more of a feeling of like there's battles being fought all over the world, and whoever survives all the battles, you meet up at some place to fight Heihachi. The intro to the scenario campaign in Tekken 6 mode kind of feels like that too, because Heihachi says that a bunch of fighters faced him, but none could stand up to him, so that makes me think it was just like a bunch of people with scheduled fights all around the world. The instruction manual, which I actually have close by, actually says that the contest is nearing its final, and that the 9 playable characters you see are the ones that made it to the final, which I thought that was a cool way of dealing with the fighting tournament problem, because there's like 14 or so characters in this game, but if it's a real fighting tournament from worldwide, shouldn't there be more of them? I like to think that lots of fighting games, that the playable characters are just the ones that made it to the finals, since usually they're the most important characters anyway. Lee, sadly, well, let's back up. Not really sadly, but was a lot more of a contender in the older games as far as the storyline goes. In the original Tekken, Heihachi decided to host a fighting tournament for whatever reason, and if you could beat him, you got to own his corporation, the Mishima Zaibatsu, which was incredibly wealthy and powerful. And Lee was Heihachi's adopted son, but he didn't adopt Lee because he wanted to be good or anything. He got him to make his real son jealous because he thought he was too weak. So in this game, at this point in the series, Lee is still in the running as far as storyline goes. As the Tekken games went on, they tend to make more and more characters joke characters, and just the main Mishimas are the only ones that have any importance. So, but at this point in the storyline, Lee is still very important. He's actually Kazuya's sub-boss, and Kazuya is the canon winner of Tekken 1. He won the tournament. He defeated Heihachi. So I'd say you're pretty important if you're the protagonist sub-boss character. Lee's bio for Tekken 1 actually even states that he and Kazuya are on equal footing as terms of power, which later on in the series he pretty much just continually loses to Kazuya. Another unfortunate casualty of the Tekken storyline putting in more and more joke characters was that Paul Phoenix is actually a very serious contender in this game as well. He fought Kazuya to a draw and enters the tournament in hopes of facing him for revenge. But that subplot was pretty much abandoned after Tekken 2, I think, as Paul is now like fighting extraterrestrials and stuff. Excuse me. So we reach the fight with Heihachi and Venezia. This is one of the stage themes that was not reused as a sub-boss theme in Tekken 2, which is disappointing because it's a really great theme, and it also received a remix just like the rest of them. Lee also has his the law flip in this game. One of his better moves, sadly. Could we do it? We just need one hit. Got him. Well, there you go. You have Tekken 1 as Lee. And unfortunately the sub-boss characters don't have endings in this game, so we don't get to see that. I was reading earlier today that Robert Belgrade did the voice of the announcer in this game, which is funny because the announcer sounds nothing like Alucard. So I'm going to make a point to sit here and look at these credits and see if I can spot him anywhere in here. He might not have got credited though. Shinji Hoso did the music for this, or Hosoi probably. He also did the music for Dragon Saber, which is another one of my favorite Namco games. No, he's not in there. So let's do our name entry here. Another thing that the arcade version didn't have, because you couldn't play as them, is portraits for the sub-boss characters. So if you use hacks to beat the game as them, you'll just get some random picture based off the normal 8 characters. But on the PlayStation version, they added those, so when you beat the time trial, you actually can see a picture. That's actually a decent time, I guess. The first time I'm not going to be able to beat because I just set the game to 1 round to rush through and unlock Lee. So I just had that 1 round playthrough as Kazuya. Also, let me show you one more thing that they added to this port. Also, that's dumb. I beat the game without losing, but because I was using Lee, I don't unlock Heihachi. You have to beat the game with Kazuya or one of the other casts to do that. Whoops. Hold on, let's try that again. Here we go. It's Lee's tuxedo outfit. This was another thing that they actually added to the PlayStation port. They gave all of these characters alternative costumes. The original playable characters had them, but the sub-bosses didn't. Notice they didn't bother changing his hands, however. If I had to guess, it's because his character model is probably a straight-up reskin of Kazuya's, and they didn't want to have to put flesh on there, so they just recolored his gloves. So Lee still wears his gloves even in the tuxedo. Trying to win this one real quick so you can get a glance of it from the other side. And by real quick, I mean just get continuously punched in the face. Alright, so let's swap over to Tekken 2. Tekken 2 is another just amazing port of the arcade game. Obviously the graphics had to be scaled back some, but there's just so much more content. For one, you get this awesome introductory scene here. Tekken's really good with I mean, Namco is really good with CGI. Like, I think that their games have some of the best CGI cutscenes. I know this is pretty what we would call primitive nowadays, but if you look at like the introduction to Tekken 5 or Tekken 6 or Tag Tournament 2 or any of those newer games, they're just amazing CGI cutscenes. Tekken 2 was actually the first PlayStation 1 game I owned. One thing that's interesting about the earlier Tekkens is, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of story content, but all the stuff that we can now easily find online about these characters, it's like the developers already had it in mind written down somewhere. Because if you know anything about Tekken, you can look at the scenarios that these characters are put into in the intro, and you're like, oh, I know what's going on there. But I imagine just seeing this back, like if it was the first time you ever played Tekken, you wouldn't know what was going on in these characters' lives. Unless you had, like, somehow found a bunch of backstory information. I know back at this time the internet wasn't super widespread yet, so a lot of people, including myself, didn't have it yet. But I think it's really neat that they kind of had these deep character backstories from the beginning, even if they didn't really have a chance to put them in yet. Like, for example, in Tekken 1, you know, Lee had the tuxedo already, even though you don't know that he's the classic guy that we now know him to be. So here's Tekken 2. Obviously, you can see the graphics are much better. They ditched the ugly 3D images at the fighter select screen and just went with these rendered ones. Lee, unfortunately, does not have the tuxedo outfit in this game, so we just have to settle for this one, the old unicorn jacket. We're going to change this back to 2 rounds. I was unlocking characters and I had it changed back. Change that to no fruit. We're going to go with arranged as well for the soundtrack. Not to say that the Tekken 2 arcade soundtrack isn't good, because it's great too. Paul Phoenix's remix theme is probably my favorite of the old school Tekken themes. And as you can see, I've selected the other outfit this time. As you can see, Tekken 2's AI is a little bit easier on the player. Tekken 1 is a great port, don't get me wrong, but it's semi-bare bones as far as features go. I mean, you got a versus mode and an option mode and the arcade mode. That was pretty much it. But this is everything you wanted. You have all the characters have endings. All the sub-bosses are fully playable with fleshed out movesets. You get a practice mode this time. You get a time attack mode. You get a survival mode. All those Tekken staples are now here. The first Tekken one was kind of a hasty port, you can kind of tell. So that's probably why the AI was so difficult, because it was still using a lot of the arcade routines. Like the Tekken 2 arcade AI is much more difficult, even on a normal setting, than the home version is on normal. Those games are kind of developed to be quarter munchers, and when they ported it quickly, they probably didn't look too much into that AI. But I think the Tekken 2 home version AI is just right. If not, maybe just a tiny bit on the easy side. One thing that is annoying is the AI does tend to duck pretty much everything rather than block it, which I'm not ragging on the AI. You know, if I see an attack's coming, I'm going to duck it too, but a lot of the stuff, there'd just be no way to duck on reaction. Like by the time you get to stage 7 or 8, you might as well not even bother throwing punches, because they're just going to duck them, and they'll usually counter you, so you just have to stick to kicks. They hadn't quite figured out how to do difficulty without just having it read your inputs yet, using the old Mortal Kombat arcade school of AI. If I lose against Paul, it's okay, because we'll get to hear some more of his great remix theme. Which I may just do that. Unless I can cheat my way out of it. It's a shame I didn't take a little more damage. I could have got a great. Well, I still got 1 round. If you score a comeback victory on stage 3, you have to fight Alex, or Roger rather. The only way to fight an AI Alex is to play as Roger. Such effort was put into these old Tekken games to make sure that every character felt different. You know, just about all the boss characters have some sort of palette swap or change up so that they don't have to fight themselves. If you play as Kazuya, who is a boss in this game this time, you face his father Heihachi on the stage you would normally face Kazuya at. And likewise, if you play as like the last boss or Kazuya's sub-boss, they have palette swaps so that you're not doing a mirror match. So the story in this Tekken, at the end of the first game, Kazuya defeated his father and threw him off a cliff, which is a running thing in the Mishima family for some reason. And after he got rid of him, because Kazuya won the tournament, he took over the Mishima Zaibatsu and turned it into a criminal organization. Which Heihachi wasn't a saint or anything, but he wasn't like full-on out criminal. So after Kazuya becomes a criminal, he gets several people gunning for him, including Lei Wulong, Jun Kazama, and a few others. And also, spoilers, Heihachi's still alive. So I really think it's interesting what Tekken as a series did. You know, 90% of fighting games in the 90s especially had a clear-cut protagonist. You know, Street Fighter had Ryu and Guile, and heck, even Daraku Tenchi has Haiji Mibu, and there's all kind of other games, like Star Gladiator, for example, had Hayate and all these things. Just a really clear-cut protagonist. Tekken 1 leads you to believe that Kazuya is a protagonist, and then makes him completely evil in the second game. And then all of a sudden, Heihachi's in charge as a protagonist. So you think he's a protagonist, but then he throws his son off a volcano in his canon ending and starts being evil again, as we see in Tekken 3. So Tekken's kind of like you don't really know who to root for, at least in the earlier installments. After Jin came along in 3, he kind of stole the series spotlight, and then his ending was canon in every Tekken game up until 6. And we don't really know the story of 7 yet, so we can't say if he won out again or if the stuff with Lars in the scenario campaign was true, which I imagine it is. Lee played a big part in the scenario campaign, so I think he needs to come back for 7. I'm hoping they announce he's coming back soon. At the time of Tekken 2, after he was defeated by Kazuya in the first tournament, and Kazuya took over the Mishima Zaibatsu, he decided to join forces with him as his secretary. And Kazuya sends him to face Heihachi to slow him down and hopefully defeat him, even though he knows he won't. There's also some nonsense about Wang Jinrei had asked Lee to bring honor to the Mishima Zaibatsu, but it's weird because nothing really ever comes of that, and we never hear anything more about Lee and Wang Jinrei interacting again. Most people assumed Wang was dead after he disappeared after Tekken 2 and didn't come back till 5. See, what I was talking about earlier, once again, Lee is the sub-boss of the character that canonically wins the tournament, so too important to leave out of 7, Namco. Lei Wulong's always been one of those characters I've had trouble fighting against. He's got a lot of mix-ups and a lot of wackiness he uses that's hard for me to get a grip on sometimes.
Round 1. Fight.
Yeah, so unfortunately, while this fight is canon, Lee did not win this fight. It would have been interesting to see what would happen if he had won Iron Fist Tournament 2. Maybe if he was the boss of Tekken 3 or something crazy like that.
win. Round 2. Fight.
He got me in the 10 hit. Unfortunately, the old Tekken games, the characters didn't have a whole lot of HP. So if you get caught in this crap, you're going to lose a lot of HP, and it'll probably even kill you if you don't have a lot of health left. I hated to cheat my way through that, but not about to lose the sub-boss battle level.
You win. Round 1. Fight.
So here we have Kazuya in his purple suit. Actually not playable until this port. In the arcade version of Tekken 2, Kazuya in the purple suit is a completely separate character in the character array. So if you want to play as him, you have to hack the game because he's not selectable by humans. After beating the game with Kazuya, after you unlock him, you can just press start to play as him in the home port. You think I would learn after the first one that that's not working. Devil. This guy is a colossal pain in the butt cheeks in the arcade version of Tekken 2. He loves to block everything and throw the laser out of nowhere like that. Fortunately, that thing is not too hard to deal with if you can actually react to it instead of just failing miserably like I did that round. Dashing in Tekken 1 and 2 is kind of weird as well, so that makes it hard to counter it. Harder than it should be. If you could run like you were supposed to, it'd be pretty easy. What you want to do when he does that is run under him and grab him from behind for maximum damage. The straight laser, really all you can do there is to punch low after you duck it or just get out of the way of it. So let's watch the ending here. You go, Lee. You got them both. You did it, Nico. You won. I guess we'll watch these credits here to see if we can spot old Robert. Tekken 2 had some really great music as well. Shinji Hosoi did it again as well. You can also spot, I believe you can, Katsuhiro Harada, who is the current series director, in the credits somewhere. He's been assisting with the series since Tekken 1, so... I looked up Ryoko Shiraishi, and she's actually still doing some stuff. I think Under the Ghost Kaminano is the name of this song, and then one from the intro is Black Winter Night Sky. Oh yeah, there's Katsuhiro Heihachi Harada. Supposedly he used to go around to demos of the game dressed as Heihachi, which is how he got his nickname. Hajime Nakatani, I don't believe he's with Namco anymore. So there you have it. There is Tekken 1 and 2 is Lee Chaolan, in hopes of getting him in Tekken 7. Yeah, that's going to happen. Some guy did a Let's Play, so they're definitely going to add that character now. More likely to get a copyright strike and a cease and desist than that is, unfortunately. Well, I hope you enjoyed these two Let's Plays. Now, I have to get back to unlocking the rest of the cast in Tekken 1 and 2. So I must bid you adieu. Y'all come back now. You hear?